I just started recording. False count, whatever. Fuck it. 174. I never get the name right, the episode number right, or the date, but I think it's 174. I think it's September 2nd, 2020, 6:02 p.m. Eastern Time. Roger Williams, author of Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect, which I have beaten into people's minds for the last week. Read this book, and so yeah. But
I think you had at least one taker, because I got an email from a totally new reader.
Oh yeah,
and I think he may have seen your podcast.
Oh yeah, did he drop a name? Do we know?
No, but it was an interesting coincidence if it was otherwise.
I've sent it to a lot of people. I've sent it to friends that I know will legitimately enjoy it, and yeah. But yeah, we were just talking about technology, and ain't it wonderful? I was watching something yesterday. I was watching this YouTube channel, Linus Tech Tips. It's like it's got like 11 million subscribers, but it's all black magic to me. But he's always just tinkering with shit, and I love watching it because I have no idea what's going on. Like, I like other history things that I kind of understand, Cold War stuff, but I also really like watching channels that I have no idea about. Like, I'm just watching it, I'm like, he's speaking in hieroglyphics, but he was trying to get an
That's funny, because it's almost exactly the opposite with me. That my job is making stuff work technologically, and then when I go out to like read about history and to watch like History Channel specials and all, it's like, wow, man, that's a bunch of shit I didn't know that was going down.
Yeah. Oh, that's my go-to is Audible right now. They did something. I'm not even gonna go. Audible's not paying me. Fuck it. I'm not gonna plug Audible. I've tried to get Audible to sponsor me. No, they can't have it. I was gonna give them a no. You know what? No, for everyone listening though, it's if you have a membership to Audible, it's $15 a month. I've probably bought $1,000 worth of books over the last 3 years. I listen all day, every day. But they started something the last week or so that they made like 10,000 titles free if you have a membership. So I've doubled my library. Fuck you, Audible, sponsor me. But yeah. Point being, I was watching this guy hook up like an 8K screen, and it just crashed his computer. But yeah, to just kind of go where we left off. Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect. I was thinking about everything we had talked about. Got my brain, got the gears turning, and I began thinking that along the lines of Alan Watts. I was like, is the whole thing, is like the whole creation of Prime Intellect, is that just almost like a death jockey contract? The idea that they had to build it in the first place, like, was he already in a thing from the get-go, like bringing it on, the assassination attempt, the birth of it, was that all? I was thinking, like, what if the whole thing was a contract?
My canon, as the writer of the story, is that it wasn't. It was actually the first iteration. But one of the things where I will go into the sequel is that there will be an equally discordant final chapter in the sequel, and it will actually set up a situation where I'll just say you'll find it real interesting.
Okay.
I don't want to spoil it because it's pretty cool.
Don't spoil it. Don't spoil it.
That's one of those things I've had in the back of my mind for 18 years now, and I can't tell anybody.
Yeah. Just lay it down. Yeah, Yeah, that's what you said last week. You said don't hold your breath for the sequel. You said you're disappointed.
Although actually, last week after we talked, a couple of days later, I actually looked back at what I have on Topi for the first time I have in several years.
Oh, yeah?
Because I had mentioned that I had finished this project that's been going on for a couple of years on Reddit. Excuse me. And I finally wrapped that up. But I wanted to take a little break. And then I told everyone who was reading the curators that what I wanted to do is to take now that I've gotten myself back used to writing and back to the groove, I want to take that energy and take another stab at the sequel to Prime Intellect, because it's something I promised a lot of people back in the day. And I think I know how to do it now. But it's just right at the time I figured out how to do it, bottom fell out. Corrosion.org finally went dark forever, and I was just left with where the hell am I going to put it? And now that's kind of opened back up, because I've realized that there are actually quite a few people who know who I am and are looking, or they are waiting. So I realized there is a market for it after all. And now the prime way to distribute it would probably be through things like EPUB and Kindle rather than posting it on a website somewhere.
Yeah.
And my wife has gotten the marketing of that sort of thing down to an art for her own projects. So it's like you showed the copy of the Kindle version of Prime Intellect, and that was a cover that she made up, because she said the cover that I made up with the that circuit diagram moth that you've probably seen makes a terrible thumbnail. And she's just like, you can't use this online. It doesn't thumbnail.
No, it doesn't. I remember the first time I found it, I was like, what the fuck is that? I thought it was like, it almost like a Word document where you tried to put like images on it and it just came up as boxes. I was like, I didn't even know it was a moth. I just always thought it was like lines. but yeah, no, her artwork is awesome. That's a beautiful piece. But yeah, you don't want to go George R.R. Martin on this shit and just, because doesn't he still owe them? Doesn't he still owe he doesn't owe anyone anything, but didn't I've never read any of his books just because I don't want to start reading something that I don't think is going to be finished. I think he's probably going to die.
Well, he apparently, the ending that they glued on to the series is not too far from what he intends to do. But he's admitted that when he starts out on a tangent, he'll take it and he just follows it wherever he wants to go. And he's at a point in his life where he can do whatever the heck he wants now, which is quite a departure. Because when HBO first bought the rights and they were doing the first season of Game of Thrones, there was a big thing, because my wife is a big fan of his from before Game of Thrones and before he became big. And he was actually in a dispute with PayPal because he couldn't pay his rent because PayPal had locked his donation account. And he was trying to get them to unlock his funds, and they were being PayPal and being dicks about it. So that was like his big thing when HBO was starting to film Game of Thrones. And of course now, this is not a problem anymore. No. Yeah, now it's which revenue stream? Yeah, it's he's got that fuck you money now. But I'll tell you the books that the hardcore George R.R. fans who knew him before, we really wish they would make a movie out of Fever Dream or the Armageddon Rag. But those weren't epic series. But like Fever Dream is about vampires on riverboats in the 19th century on the Mississippi River. I mean, it's awesome.
Sounds like a fever dream. Yeah, it does. It's
so and in that novel, the vampires do not turn humans. They're a different species. So they simply coexist, and they're like predators who walk among us. But it's not like the legend where they bite you and you turn into a vampire. But he has the vampires, some of them that are on the evil side of things, using this to enslave humans by promising, if you be my loyal helper and help me out and do stuff for me in the daytime, then when the time is ripe, I'll turn you.
Yeah.
And these poor saps are going along with it, thinking they're going to live forever, and it's like, ha ha ha. It was just like it's all full of stuff like that, because Martin just does a good job on stuff like that. I mean, it's like, if you had beings like this, they would totally do shit like that.
Yeah. One thing, do you ever watch the comedy? I don't think they're together anymore as like a duo. Key and Peele. They're huge, and like 5 years. I mean, they have some of the funniest like 2-minute sketches on YouTube. I mean, it's one of the few things that will like get you like in tears, crying, laughing. And one of them is them getting bitten by vampires, but instead of like hanging out in like a dark mansion and it be all the sexual like tension, one of the vampires is like, "Yo, why we always hang out in this mansion? Why we always like tickling each other's nipples? Like, why can't we ever turn some lights on in this place, man?" He's like, "What y'all doing? Like, this is gross." And he's like, two girls like all over each other, and they're like, "Why do you guys always make that noise?" They're like, "You don't need to. Just open them up. Just open up your fangs." He's like, "We don't need to be this weird sex cult." He's like, "I got bit on purpose, so I can." This is my favorite line. "I got bit on purpose, so I can live forever and see future cars." And just like, And like later on, he was like, I mean, what will they be? Will they be self-driving? Will they all be maglev? Like, I don't know, but that's why I got bit.
I want my goddamn flying cars, even if I have to get bit by a vampire.
Yeah, but it's my favorite. It's like my favorite comedy line. I got bit on purpose so I can live forever and see future cars. But I love my guilty pleasure is like just going down like the rabbit hole conspiracy. Not even like conspiracies that you can like kind of entertain, you know, where there's like some truth to them. My real guilty pleasure is just like the room temperature IQ, just like, you know, the dumbest shit you can get, where it's just like LARPing, it's role playing. And
I got a coworker, that's his hobby, is he likes to follow dumbass conspiracy theories. He's always hitting me with, you heard the latest reason we didn't go to the moon?
But that's the way to go. You can't embrace it and be like, this is real. The way to go is to just admit that this is your guilty pleasure. You know, some people watch the Kardashians. Mine is just the fucking half-baked, you know, 40-part series on YouTube. Each one's like 9 hours long. It's just like, why lizards...
I remember years and years ago, my wife and I were on a tour with a bunch of other bird watchers. And so this is, we had like maybe 15 people on this tour, and most of them are fairly well off. They showed up with $30,000 worth of camera equipment and all. And there was this couple that they had to get the latest copy of the Weekly World News. They knew that it came out on Wednesday, and it's like we had to go find a grocery store so they could get their copy of the Weekly World News. And everybody else was like, "Are you guys insane?" And it's like, "No, man. Have you?" It's like it was just like it is. That was, of course, this was like in the '90s, so the internet wasn't there. So that if you wanted your conspiracy wackadoodle stuff, that was where you got it.
Yeah. But
that boy.
Yeah. But that's my guilty pleasure, because the way I look at it is like, I look at things like Comic-Con or something, or like Harry Potter. And, you know, I had friends that would always go to the movies and they're all like dressed up, right? Or like different like Dungeons and Dragons. I have friends that do that, but I can never get into any of those. But it's like, in general, there's like a general, like, you know, you don't break character, right? You stay in character so it's believable for everyone.
Yeah.
So my idea was like, well, if I start like going into these conspiracy circles online, you don't need to worry about breaking character, because everyone, they're not in character. This is what they truly believe. So to me, it's like the ultimate haunted house or something, where it's like actual.
You're kind of the straight man, and they're all of the
Yeah, and I don't go in there. I don't make fun of them. I don't point out like the ridiculousness of it. I just go on, and you know, I put on my mask, and I'm like, I'm gonna play along. But it's great because no one ever breaks, because there's no character to break. It's what they really believe. So to me, it's like the ultimate role playing. So you go into these like forums and shit, or subreddits, where it's like the lizard people are in the Hollow Earth, and you can just go in, and it's just like, and it's fantastic. It's like the best writing ever, because no one's writing it as like, I need to develop this story. They actually think they're uncovering this conspiracy. So it's like no one breaks character. It's super in depth. There's like a passionate thing about it, and it's not even, you can read. You can message people, and they'll give you the down low on what they think's going on. It is. That's why I don't have Netflix, is because I have found my own entertainment. You know, not even like the digestible conspiracies. You know, what crashed at Roswell in 1947. You know, Gulf of Tonkin, where you kind of play, you know, money fixating, big banks. But that's all. You know, that's not crazy enough. You really want to buckle up, and you go in and you're like, all right, the lizard people have harnessed free energy, and they're sucking the souls out of our children, and they're here from the Draco star system. And it's like, fuck yeah, get my popcorn. Let's do this, bitch. And it's great because the canon is always growing, because it's all based on real life. So it's like, Elon wants to go to Mars. This is really why. So there's always a new episode. It's every day. It's real life. There's a new episode. Something's coronavirus. Is it just a pandemic, or is it the Greys trying to get us off the planet? And it's like, fuck yes. There's no shortage of information. If you think rationally, then you're an outcast. They kick you out. So it's just like, the game never stops. It's always updated. It has a essentially limitless writing team. It's endless. videos, photoshops. It's endless. You go in, you can they'll make up histories for like why Napoleon did this or that. It's just the crazier, the better, and there's no shortage. You can't finish it. It's an endless game to get lost in.
Yeah.
And
the whole thing is that the handful of people who have a particular theory like that now can find one another over the internet and feed off of one another, and it just blows up.
Yes. And then if you're like me, you can get your movie ticket for free. You just go into one of these forums and just look around, and it's just like, it's amazing. It's amazing. If you break character, it doesn't matter. No one else is going to, because this is what they believe, and it's awesome. It's fucking awesome. It's the best entertainment. Now, I mean, a little crazy.
So it's like having a free pass to P.T. Barnum's museum.
Yes. It's Six Flags is open 24/7, and but to everyone else, it isn't even a ride. But to you, you're like, fuck yeah, like let's go on this. Like, please tell me why George Bush is a reptile. Like, let's do it. Fucking balls deep. Let's go. But the idea that I like from it, every once in a while you'll come across an idea that's kind of nifty. And one of the ones I like about it is like, what if the elites are some sort of like immortal beings, right? But they could just shapeshift and just so like Napoleon could still be alive, but it might just be the same entity. They were Genghis Khan, they're Napoleon, they were Obama, now they're Trump, now they're Kissinger. But it's just one, you would never know. Like, where, they die, like, you don't see them go in the casket. Like, it just, the next thing. I love that idea.
It's funny because one of Philip K. Dick's short stories that they haven't actually made into a movie yet, can you imagine, is set in a dystopic future with, the usual, authoritarian regime and everything. And the conspiracy theorists, the little cabal at the heart of everything, discovers that there are drugs being put in the water supply that make you hallucinate. And so when they give people the antidote to the hallucinogens that are in the water supply, they see the president of the United States as an alien. Except they don't all see him as the same alien. Depending on which group you're in, there are like 4 or 5 different forms. And so they're classifying people according to how, when they stop taking the hallucinogens, which version of the alien president do they see? And they're trying to work this out. And it's deliciously Philip K. Dickian. But it's like, eventually they're going to have made every word the man wrote into a movie, so we're just waiting for that.
Yeah, it's just a matter of time. Have you seen the movie They Live?
Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. Put on the glasses and you see just like the fleshy faces, and it's just like they see you. I like that idea because I like to entertain it because it makes the rest of the insanity a little more believable. You'd be like, okay, because you can't really entertain the idea of like the Illuminati otherwise. And this is, if you can't tell, I've put a lot of thought into this, is because they're right because their plans are all they're like centuries long, right? Sometimes millennia long. But so that would imply that it's like a generational thing, which means that they're working on something that they won't see the end of, which is
let me hit you with something that I usually get ragged on when I mention it in tech circles, okay? Because back in the 80s and early 90s, my wife and I had a side business selling semi-precious gemstones and little things like that. Sure. And a big segment of our business was the New Age community. So we had to learn a lot of their lore and stuff. And part of that was astrology. And one of the things that I noticed is that the Catholic Church has a mystical tradition. It's based on the Jewish Kabbalah. And one of the funny things that happened is the Catholics, they kept a lot of that stuff under wraps, because for the people who were forming the Catholic Church in the 4th and 5th century, this lore was power. These were secrets. These were like the nuclear codes of their day. Yeah. And so they didn't want people to know about it. One of the things that they didn't want people to know about was the great year in astrology. Now, I know you've heard the song, The Age of Aquarius. This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. Okay. What that refers to, of course, is the Earth's axis precesses as it
precession of the equinoxes.
Every 24,000 years. At any given time, the North Pole is nodding toward one of the zodiacal constellations. And this changes about every 2,000 years. Now, 2,000 years ago, the great year switched from the sign Aries to the sign Pisces. That happened right around the time some guy named Jesus of Nazareth was having a ministry in Palestine.
Okay.
So if you know anything about astrological lore, Aries, of course, is an earth sign. It's physical power. It is a perfect metaphor for the Roman Empire, which projected its presence through strength and military prowess. Pisces is a water sign. It is about feeling and emotion and vulnerability. And Pisces is actually a good descriptor for a certain religion that came about at that time, because it's all about your God getting crucified and dying for your sins and being forgiven. And all of these are very waterish type ideas. And I've always thought, ever since I learned the symbology, that it is obviously not an accident that the early Christians decided to use a fish for their symbol, because that was the new great year. If you were educated in the first century AD, you would be expected to know this the same way you would be expected to know electricity flows in circuits if you're educated today. It was something an educated person would know, because the precession of the equinoxes had been discovered like in the 4th century BC. It was well known to the people who had any kind of education. So the church traded on this. To them, this was a great source of their power, because this was their aeon, literally, their time in the sunlight. Fast forward, though, to the modern era. Okay, we just had, depending upon whose calculations you follow, everybody agrees that the great year has moved from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. Now, Aquarius is an air sign. Aquarius is a sign of thought, calculation, industry. And it is impossible to, if you have any kind of belief in this stuff at all, you look at the transition from the Renaissance to the 20th century, and it is just friggin' obvious that this stuff is spot on. Now, now, whether you believe in it yourself or not, if you take an organization like the Catholic Church, for whom this has been their secret lore for 2,000 years, and their own magical system is now telling them it's time to shut off the lights and close the curtains because your time is over. And all you got to do is take a look at the world. You know who's very Aquarian? Most people don't realize this. Nazis.
Oh, yeah. Well, they had the Anna Nerva Society. They had a whole dude. They were balls deep in the occult. Yeah,
and it's their age. This is because they were all about thought and calculation and all of this air type stuff, and they were very down on emotion and weakness like that. So
I'm listening
that didn't quite make it into the fifth dimension song.
I'm listening to this book right now, Blitzed.
The
Third Reich.
The whole thing was powered by methamphetamines.
Oh, the entire thing. The entire thing was on meth. But
that was their thing. So anyway, if you look at this from the standpoint of the people who are at the middle of the Catholic Church, whose own lore is now telling them that your time in the limelight is over, the baton is being passed, and events in the real world are backing this up in ways that nobody ever expected, even a couple of 100 years ago. If you look at some of the kind of strange things the Catholic Church has done in the last 50 years or so, it suddenly snaps into focus that they're trying to carve out a place for themselves in this world that they know they don't belong in anymore.
They're adapting. It's Blockbuster should have become Netflix. They should have become Netflix. That's what it is.
Well, they're hoping that what happens to them isn't what happened to the pagan priests in the 4th century AD. But all of their lore is telling them, don't hold your breath, guys. And I've just found that was a wonderfully illuminating way to look at things.
Yeah, I like it.
And most people don't get it. Because the other funny thing is that when the Protestants split off, starting with Martin Luther, none of them were prominent members of the Vatican and the Central Church. There were no bishops or anybody with that kind of clout. And so all of these secrets were lost to the Protestants. They didn't take this lore. What they thought was the big secret is that they read the Bible. Mm-hmm. And before Gutenberg and a few of those guys, it was actually a capital offense to translate the Bible into the vernacular. You were supposed to be educated in order to be, the Bible was there to be interpreted by a professional.
Yeah, it was
the whole thing.
It was the nuclear
that came
codes.
out of the Council of Nicaea. Mm-hmm. This idea that any schmo in rural Pakistan can open the Bible and start deciding what it means. Yeah. No, that's not the way they were looking at it. So when the people who came after Martin Luther, that's what they thought the big secret power is. But the actual Catholics were like, well, yeah, sure, that's what it is. Yeah, well, yeah, but they had the real secrets, and it took people like Aleister Crowley is the reason we know about a lot of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And people don't realize things like that. Part of my perspective on religion was, I was raised Southern Baptist. Mm-hmm. Now, my parents were from Mississippi. They moved to New Orleans before I was born, so my dad could go to college at Tulane University, and he studied physics. Right. He was seduced by the Atomic Energy Commission. They sent a van around to his rural school when he was like 12 years old, and he was boggled. He was like, he wanted to discover new elements and do all of this fantastic stuff. So he had really good scores for a rural, guy who grew up in Laurel, Mississippi. And so he made it. He came to New Orleans, the big city, went to one of the better universities, and with his wife, they had me. And in New Orleans, if you want your child to have the best secular education, the best chance of getting into the best colleges, you send them to a Catholic school. Yeah. All of the best schools in the New Orleans area are the Catholic schools. Yeah. That's just the way.
I went to a Catholic school in Atlanta. It's just they were they were just better institutions.
Yeah, and it's not that way everywhere. In a lot of places, the parochial schools are there to put a clamp on things and to make sure there are no poisonous thoughts being spread. But here, it's more that the Catholic schools have an arrangement. They have a lot of non-Catholic students. So if you're not Catholic and you want to send your child to Holy Cross, they have an arrangement where you will be you're excused from the liturgies and the catechisms and the rituals and stuff. But you do have to take the half-credit religion course every year. Mm-hmm. And so you have to learn what Catholics believe and what the rituals are, even if you're not performing them. So you find out what the Stations of the Cross are and what confession is and all this stuff that Baptists don't do. And I really think that we would all be better off if more people who called themselves Christians had been forced to do that, because that gave me a perspective about what were supposedly my beliefs came from. Sure. That it was like they didn't emerge from a vacuum. They didn't emerge straight from the pages of the Bible. There were some human beings doing some interpretation there. Mm-hmm. And that set the stage for when they did the survey of world religions when I was in 11th grade, and it all just imploded. It was like I couldn't do the double think anymore.
Religions of the World, 1005. Yeah.
And I'm like, so we had to learn what Buddhists believe, what Hindus believe, what Japanese Shintoists believe, and all. And I'm just like, wait a minute. Yeah. If I had been born in India, I would believe this just as fervently as I was taught to believe that.
Start thinking.
And it's just like, wait a minute. This is this is a bunch of guys sitting around deciding this sounds cool.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And but yeah, and so that gets you. For one thing, it's like you are with the conspiracy. It's like it opens you up more to. You're more open to other beliefs because you're not taking any of them quite so seriously,
Sure.
and you start to see how things are connected. Now, my dad, who's probably going to watch this, remains a devout Christian. He's also a physicist who taught physics for decades, and he believes that things like evolution and geological time are the tools that God obviously used to create a universe in the form he wanted to see.
Sure.
And why would he lie about it? That doesn't make any sense. And it's a very sensible way to look at that.
Yeah.
But oh my God, some of the people we used to go to church with are just like, They went off the edge of the flat Earth years ago.
Yeah. Dude, one of my smartest friends is he's a physician now. He's a devout Catholic. But he's like, to me, it doesn't infringe on like science at all. He's like, I just look at it as like the language of God. He's like, it's just because you can, or it's like what Alan Watts said. He's like, science explains like how. It doesn't explain why, but explains how.
Yeah.
He's like, it doesn't.
Well, you notice the Catholic Church has been a lot more open to that in the last few years too. I wonder why.
Adapt or die. Yeah, adapt or die, man. Adapt or die. You gotta. It's Doesn't the Catholic Church have like a telescope, and the acronym is Lucifer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know about that, but they do have an observatory at the Vatican.
I'm pretty sure I don't think that's even a conspiracy. I think that's just like a head scratcher. Let's see.
They do a number of things that most people wouldn't understand.
Does the large utility camera and integral field unit for extragalactic research, Lucifer.
Somebody was having
they changed it to They changed it to Lucy. Yeah, but that doesn't have anything to do with anything I was talking about. But I don't know why I just went into that. But it's I that's another thing I like about like conspiracies. Is it Voltaire that said he had to find out who's in power, simply find out who you can't criticize. That was one of his good ones. But another one, I think it was Voltaire. He said, like, the sign of intelligence is the willingness and ability to entertain an idea without necessarily believing it. So not to say, entertain an idea. You think the earth is hollow. I don't believe that. I have a biology degree. I took all the science courses. I have 12 years of private schooling before college. But sure, like I will open my mind because I do think that is a valuable thing.
Tell me why you think this makes sense.
Yeah, I do think that is a valuable thing to open your mind and say, because that allows you to take it in and go, all right, no, I don't believe that. But okay, but that also keeps it open to other things. So whereas you might keep it open and let me hear your argument for why the earth is hollow or why lizard people run the world. Okay, I don't like it. But that also that there is a value in that tool of keeping open to say, maybe let me hear what this candidate is saying, or let me hear what this, I'm on a date with this woman, let's see where this goes. Who knows, maybe you find your lifelong love because you decided to open up a little more, and next thing you know, you're like, wow, and you're just with that person for 50 years. Or you take on this politics or philosophy, or let's say you're an investor, very real world, like, let's open my mind and see what this new company has to say. Next thing you know, there's your next billionaire. So there is value in keeping the mind open and, keeping your email inbox open. You don't have to respond to all of them. You don't have to, but.
Well, you need a garbage filter, but
it's
at the same point, you don't want to hide your address from everybody.
Don't soda straw it, because then you're only taking in what you want to see. And now you're just as bad as the people who are telling you that, God damn it, the earth is flat. It's, you're just as bad. If you isolate yourself on a little island of belief, that doesn't do anyone any good. But yeah, Or it doesn't have to be serious. You can just go and read stupid conspiracies like I do, which I love. Full circle. That's the idea I love about like these eternal, immortal elites. Is to me that makes a little more sense for the lore, because right. So this group has been around for thousands of years, right? The ones that controlled Egypt are the ones that are controlling COVID, and it's because if you don't have like an immortal being, what you have to have is it's a generational project or scheme. Well, if it's a generational project or scheme, that means these people are clearly working on something and putting chess pieces into place that they know they will not see the end of, which is fine. That there's like the quote, "A society goes great when men plant trees whose shade they know they will not sit under." But that's the antithesis of a supposed Illuminati group, right? A bunch of psychopathic narcissists. The last thing they're going to do is set up a system for their kids and their grandkids. No,
that's kind of the situation that Robert Anton Wilson set up in the Illuminatus trilogy, which is considered to be like the grand masterpiece of conspiracy theory fiction.
I need to read it.
It's and Wilson himself is a really interesting character. He passed away, it's about 10 years ago now. But he wrote a number of really freaky books, and he was a big champion of not believing anything. His things was that beliefs imprison you, and that you should have you should have an open mind. You should have filters, but you should also that said once you say I believe a certain thing, that one of the ways he put it was convictions create convicts.
Okay.
Once you decide that you believe a thing, then that imprisons you. It limits your ability to think about things that contradict that belief, and it limits your willingness to entertain things. So he would heartily approve of your hobby. In fact, he was one of the big practitioners of it himself. In fact, he's one of the, he was a big fan of Aleister Crowley's, and he really loved literary and word puzzles. And so one of the things he loved was taking apart something like Finnegan's Wake and just figuring out what all the little word puzzles meant and what the underlying meaning was. And so he knew all of this occult lore that he had picked up from obscure sources, and he wrote some popular books about it. So it was through him that I found out about Crowley, and it was one of them. May have been through Crowley I got to Sod, but you really want to go back, to I think the Marquis de Sade was a contemporary of Voltaire's. Of course, I know he was there for the French Revolution. In fact, Sade was about the only person left in the Bastille when it was liberated. But here's a person who really never did a hell of a lot other than write stuff, who spent more than half his life in prison for it. And he was just he hated hypocrisy, and he saw the world filled with hypocrites who didn't practice what they claimed to believe, and so he loved to write them into ridiculous situations. But I know you've heard of A Modest Proposal as being like the best satire ever written, but Sade wrote one called Yet Another Effort, Frenchmen, If We Would Become Republicans. And it was originally a pamphlet, but it was today, if you want to read it, you have to get Philosophy in the Bedroom, and it's in the middle of the book as a pamphlet the characters read. And it's a pamphlet he published right after the French Revolution, and it starts out with, if we're going to do this Republican thing, this Republic thing, we need to do it right. We need to go all the way. And he starts by saying the first thing we have to do is get rid of religion. And of course, this would have been a popular viewpoint in the years right after the French Revolution. So he goes down a bunch of arguments that seem kind of, it's kind of hard to argue with them. Okay, if you're on that side of the political spectrum. And then he goes about, and then we had to ditch the monarchy, which of course was also a very popular idea for his audience at the time. But then he starts going about how we need to legalize theft, because what is theft but a man taking advantage of his natural capability to enrich himself because someone else wasn't paying attention? This is a natural thing. People are going to do it. Why make it illegal? Yeah. And he goes down, and the next thing in the next few pages, he's arguing that we need to legalize rape and then murder. And to this day, there are people who argue about whether he was being serious or not because he's a Martina Sans.
But but I always think about like cheating in like sports. I think that's part of the game. I think steroids, I think that's part of the game. Are you smart enough to? Yeah. Are you dumb enough to be like, I'm not going to take anything? Or it's like, you're going for the Super Bowl. Yeah, you're going to, a truly the most fit in the evolutionary term, fit, FIT, is the one that would say, I never take anything, but meanwhile, they're using their bankroll to find like an untraceable HGH. That is the most fit player. The most fit player is the one that lies on one face and then they do it in the background. Cheating is just part of the game. If you get caught, there's a severe penalty, Well,
and part of it is that we don't want to admit to ourselves as a society that this is our version of the gladiatorial games. Yeah. They did a survey of professional athletes a long time ago. It may have even been back in the 80s, but I remember it well, where they asked a bunch of professional athletes if there was a drug that would, with total certainty, make you a champion, that would make you number one in your field if you took it, but it would also kill you within 5 years. Would you take it? And some ridiculous, like 80% of them said yes. Yeah, I would take that. I would do that. Yeah, and that's one of the. It's like we have this elaborate fiction that things like NFL football aren't us sitting there watching people killing themselves. They are. Whereas even if you discount the concussion thing, an NFL football player's life expectancy is like 20 years less than the rest of us.
Oh yeah, even without concussions, just that constant jerking motion.
They retire at 40 and they're a wreck.
Yeah, they can't walk, they can't think. It's gladiators. MMA, just beating each other's heads in with elbows. But that's kind of the payoff, though, is like you're going to die, but it's like we're all going to die. Do you want to, I made it to 80, but I can't walk, I'm incontinent, and I don't know who I am? Or it's like you die at 40, but goddamn, you get to go out the champion.
Yeah, and everyone was watching me on TV.
Yeah, and I'm, you're going to die. At least they got to experience like Valhalla while they lived.
Yeah.
Is that better? I don't know. I don't know. Is it better to live till 90 and just die slowly? Or is it better to, you go out at, you're 27, but you go out as Kurt Cobain or Avicii or Jimi Hendrix. You're immortal. You're Kobe, right? I don't know. I don't know.
One of my coworkers who just hit 40 said that when he was younger, his byline was live fast, live hard, and leave a pretty corpse. And he said about the time he started to get close to 40, he realized that wasn't working so well for him anymore.
Yeah. Well, that's the kind of the duality of it. Is it's a great mindset, but you have to have it while you're young. It's like you got to embrace that while you're young. If you just so happen to live through it,
you're getting into.
Yeah, it's now like I'm 30. Now I'm like, okay.
Every culture has had its niche for people like that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of silly that we try to deny that that's a thing.
Yeah. It's, live fast, die young. I'm trying to connect to my phone. Internet just got a little fucky, but it's not, whatever. But yeah, it is. But there's like an odd romanticism to it though, right? Like who was it, Mac Miller, that died a couple of years ago? Young rapper, 27. There's a lot of romanticism to it. Worth $50 million, baller. He's like a young Eminem, and you're gone before you're 30.
The infection is starting to do the thing you were worried about.
Yeah, damn. Hold on. Let's see. Hotspot. Come on, you stupid fucking phone. Hotspot, personal hotspot. Let's see. Set up.
Well, we made it almost an hour.
No, we will not die. God damn it. Don't die on me. Why isn't it working? Normally it lets me set it up. Hotspot. Just fucking do it. God damn it. Just fucking... Can you hear me? Are we good right now? Roger?
The screen resolution just changed.
Are we good? No? Sorry for everyone listening. I'm trying to figure this shit out.
Yeah, I think it may have stopped buffering quite as much.
Okay, hold on.
Of course, you're not moving very much, so I can't tell whether it's frozen.
Let's see.
Yeah, that seems to be smoother.
It's better now?
Is the audio was also starting to stutter before.
Is it good now, though?
Yeah, so far it sounds good, a lot better.
Yeah, I don't know why, but it still didn't connect. I don't know why it's...
Maybe we just let the buffers flush.
Maybe... Fuck it. Let's just not ruin it. Let's not touch it. Let's not... It's... Hey, man, this is my...
Still working.
This is my George R.R. Martin. This is my I can't pay rent because PayPal. This is... Did you know when Tommy was younger, the early podcasts, they'd have to cut it off because they couldn't find a hotspot? That's my moment. Or that's what I'm telling myself. This is my moment. That's one thing I've helped. I have a friend of mine. I have two other friends who are kind of going on the same, like, insane journey. Like, I turned down a med school acceptance to, well, do a lot of things, but this is the most recent iteration. I had a friend named Aaron who did a full year of medical school and then quit, and now he's building telekinetic robots. He's doing shit with NASA. I have another friend named Warren who's been on this podcast, and he did an internship at JPL and NASA, and he has an aerospace engineering degree from Georgia Tech, but he turned down all these jobs, and he's making a microsatellite called MemeSat. And all it does is beam back memes. But he's managed to... Yeah, I know, right? You can submit your own memes, but he's actually managed to acquire like $40,000 in funding from all these different industries. He got in touch with one of the chief technical officers at SpaceX. But us three talk about, we're like, we got to just look at what we're doing right now is like, it's the superhero origin story. No superhero is just like, now I'm the superhero. Something horrible always happens first, and then they become the superhero. So that's what's keeping us in check. I mean, it might just be like a group denial, a group delusion. Hey, this is our superhero story. Meanwhile, our lives are just collapsing around us. But that's the way I look at it. So fuck it. This poor internet, it's my origin story. But yeah, but I don't even know what we were talking. Whatever. Illuminati.
Yeah.
If you could live forever, you would have people that set up 1,000-year plans, right? Slow, because China has a 100-year plan. They have a 100-year plan to pass the U.S. by 2049, and it's slow, it's meticulous, decade-long moves, just moving the chess pieces.
Well, if you think about it, too, the Egyptians had kind of that viewpoint when they're building pyramids and sarcophagi and doing mummies and stuff like that. In fact, my dad is taking an online or a video course right now on Egyptian hieroglyphics, and he pointed out that to the ancient Egyptians that the surest way to be immortal was to be a scribe, because you would live as long as anything you had written. And said they might steal a mummy from your tomb, but if you were a scribe, then as long as your writing survived, then your mark was on the world. You had a presence.
That is true. In a sense, if you put anything online now, if you broadcast anything, in a sense you're eternal, because aren't the radio frequencies, aren't they just going out at the speed of the light from Earth? Mm-hmm. Like right now, Hitler's speeches are 85 light years away.
Yeah, I too saw the opening credits to Contact.
Fuck you. God damn it.
And as soon as I said it, you knew.
Roger 1, Tommy 0. Touche, sir. Point. But that was brutal. Fucking kick you off my podcast right now. But yeah,
every once in a while I get one in.
Yeah, hey, you got to get them when you can, man. You got to. He saw the opening and he took it. It's Jurassic Park.
Yeah, you know what they say about old age and skill versus youth and idealism or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Although I got a lot of room to talk. I'm still a glorified service technician, so hey. You know.
It's like the Jurassic Park line is, son of a bitch did it. That crazy son of a bitch did it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, I like to think about that, though, because if you look at it that way, you can kind of, like, embrace these ideas more. Like, okay, like, all right, there's, like, I don't know how to, like, but it'd be, like, gradual things. Like, you know, the lore of, like, the Illuminati is there's, like, a 100-year plan right now to increase urbanization so you can get everyone in one place. Much easier to control, right? And then part of the lore is, like, there will be a pandemic to reduce the Earth's population by 80%, right? And it would only make sense if you looked at it from the viewpoint of, like, a multi-thousand-year being.
Yeah. Well, of course, part of it is that even in a time scale of 100 years, we're crap at planning for the future. So, I mean, even if you lived longer than, you know, what did you do? There was a guy named Tom Rainbow who wrote for Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine in the 80s, and he generally did nonfiction articles. He was one of the very first people who had a graduate degree in physics and was going for an MD on top of that, so that he could study the way that physical systems and biological systems acted like physical systems. That kind of interdisciplinary thing is more common nowadays, but then he was like at the vanguard of it, and he wrote this article on superintelligence. And what was funny is it was Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine, and the illustrator illustrated the story with a photorealistic likeness of Dr. Asimov himself, about which there was a letter to the editors from Asimov in the next issue. But one of the things he pointed out is, like, even if I had a super brain the size of a planet, I would probably use it to sort my baseball card collection, and I would, like, memorize all the sports scores, and you know, I wouldn't necessarily be using it to make the world a better place. It was an interesting perspective there too. It's like, if you had those abilities, would you? There's an assumption that a lot of people make that you would, of course, use them for either good or evil or something big, you know, and. You know, even when we do have ability, I mean, look at all the people who have, you know, you don't even want to know what my test scores are. And it's like, you know, I'm not out flying the Hubble telescope and shit like that. It just didn't work out that way. And for most people, it doesn't. It's because that's a whole rat race into itself. And it's not just skill, it's also politics. And sometimes you just, you know, you get to the top of that hill and you see the next one, and it's just like, man, fuck this shit. Yeah. I'm just gonna put out the picnic blanket right here. You know? Yeah, it's like, this is fine. I'm good. Fine. What's the next mountain up? Yeah, it's. Yeah, it's. And I noticed that you didn't ask about what I do in the real world. You know, my version of the thing that pays the bills and all that. And since the mid-'80s, I started out as a service technician, and I basically design industrial control systems. Oh, yeah? So, you know, mostly for things that involve weighing and measurement. I work for a company that originally just sold industrial scales. And so in the beginning, no one knew a computer from a hole in the ground. I was the guy who came out to fix your scale, and I wore green Dickies. And over time, the fact that I could program computers became more and more useful, and my job description morphed. And today, I'm the guy they come to. If we got a customer, he wants to weigh trucks in and out, and he needs to collect some data, and he needs to generate a report and send it to his mainframe. And so I figure out how to make all that work, pick the equipment, write the software that's necessary. But I'm a one-man shop. I don't do enterprise stuff and the big databases and all. I'll do front ends for them, or someone else tells me we want to import a file with some data in it, and I'll give it to them. But I'm there doing, like, the actual machinery. Mm-hmm. You know, if you're filling bags, or you're doing batches to do recipes in a food plant where you're doing stuff that, you know, has different ingredients that people are going to buy that you're going to cook later in another part of the process. And so I do the systems that do things like that. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's not sexy and glamorous, and I'm not changing the world. But on the other hand, it is a near certainty that you have eaten something that was passed over a machine that I programmed. At one point, almost every catfish sold in the United States went across a sorting machine that I would have designed. It's little things like that are also the grease that makes the world work.
Yeah.
If you didn't have those things, then the people like Lawrence building the seed AI of the Singularity wouldn't be anywhere.
No.
Where's he without the guy that's registering the lithographic masks for the chip forming process?
Yeah. Well, what you said is it's also the little things that kind of grease the world. I wouldn't say it's also. I would say it's almost entirely. Like, you have some movers and shakers every century, but I mean, the vast majority of it is Elon's got a lot of great ideas. He's not operating the crane inside of a Tesla factory. I would say it's okay. I can talk into this and I can find guests. I have no idea how to build a computer, and even those that designed it have no idea how to refine the ore the fucking the compounds, the polycarbonates that are melted together, and how to make the keys and the neon lights in the background, and how to get the right dyes. And I have no idea how to do that. It's like right now. Nowadays, they don't even know how all the software works. No.
I mean, there's so many pieces written by so many different people and entities that have to work together. And when they don't, for some reason, there's nobody that you can go to say, well, oh, yeah, sure, this is the problem with this API over here. I mean, I'm doing crap like that all day long. And, a lot. Half of my job, I say the bane of my life is other people's software. It's like if I never had to deal with anyone else's software, my job would be so much easier.
Yeah.
Because you're not just figuring out how the computer works. You're figuring out what this other guy did, who maybe didn't have such a good idea how the computer works and didn't do something the way you would have done it.
Yeah.
And you've got to figure out how he did the thing that's not acting the way you want, and how to work around it and get it to do what you actually want it to do, if you even can. So. Yeah, that's an interesting thing too, is that as the world gets more complicated, so much of our industry is being diverted to bullshit like that.
Yeah.
Because stuff it used to be that, the Commodore 64 and the Apple II, and those machines were essentially designed by a few people. And they could all walk into each other's offices and discuss their ideas and make sure everything was working together. But starting in the early 80s, you had, of course, the IBM PC, but there was also machines like the Coleco Atom. People don't realize how complex it was, which are made of all of these subsets, which are supposed to work together through interfaces that are just defined as standards, and you're not supposed to worry about the thing on the other side of that interface. Mm-hmm. And I've always called bullshit on that, because my idea is that if you don't know how that thing works, then it is going to stab you in the fucking heart one day, and you are not going to have any idea what happened. You are just going to be there bleeding while your customer goes, "Can't you make it work?" But that's not the way companies think. That's not the way designers think anymore. And just a little thing like this tablet has so many systems. It's like when Skype decides to maximize itself. Oh, that sounded like a good idea when they wrote the program.
Yeah. Highest resolution. Yeah.
Yeah, and my computer goes.
Yeah. It's. I think it was Joe Rogan. I remember this quote that I always remember. It's on some podcast years ago. Wasn't even a notable guest, but I just remember him saying, "Does anyone even know how to build a TV today?" And he goes, "But he's like, take that question literally, like break it down verbally. Mm-hmm. Does anyone know how to build a computer or a TV?" No.
There is actually a web ring which tells you how old the group is for people who built their own CPUs.
Oh yeah.
And there's about 40 pages on the web ring. There's a guy who built a fully functional 16-bit CPU out of relays. It took him like 400 relays. And he has this enormous cabinet set that he takes to shows and stuff, and where you can see all the blinking lights because all the relays have little things and you hear it clacking. It works at about 10 cycles per second. There's people who've done it with transit. In fact, you can buy a kit for a MOS 6502 microprocessor, the same processor that ran the Apple II and the Commodore 64, only it's made with discrete transistors. It's a circuit board that's about that big, and it's got like 5,000 transistors on it. And then when you read about these guys, though, it's like they lost the plans for the 6502. No one knew how it worked anymore. And starting in the early aughts, there's a group that started taking the chips apart and using acids and stuff to take the layers off one at a time and photographing them with microscopes, and then building a physical emulation of the silicon as they found it in order to figure out how the chip worked. Jeez. Because when these chips, when the 6502 and the Z80 in particular were designed by engineers who didn't even build a circuit diagram, they built the chip in the form of the blowed up lithographs that would be used to expose the silicon in order to form the layers. So they were sitting here drawing the bottom layer, the endo, the p-dope layer, the metal layer and all, and building transistors one at a time in this by hand to make a microprocessor. And you look at that in modern terms, it's like, okay, well, yeah, someone also wrote Moby Dick out longhand too.
Yeah, yeah.
I couldn't do that either.
Yeah, but it's like
Herman Melville.
Yeah, don't they like not have the plans for the engines that were used on the Apollo, on the Saturn V, the F1 engines? Don't they not know how to build them? Don't.
That's one of the bits of lore that I'm somewhat familiar with too. In fact, one of the reasons that I think it was Elon Musk wanted to fish the Apollo engines up from the bottom of the Atlantic was to compare the engines that flew with the diagrams and stuff that we have, because it was all done with pencil and paper, and the actual, the best documentation we have doesn't necessarily conform to what flew.
Yeah.
The same thing is true of the flight computers, the computers that ran the LEM and the CSU. They have different versions, and I know there's a group that has one that they've been trying to get working again, and they're all, it's like, well, we have this version of the ROM, and how's this for programming?
Yeah.
They used iron core memory, which means that you have basically a sheet of wires. You've got a grid. They go vertically, they go horizontally. Two of them go through each of these magnetic donuts. And then there is one or two sense wires that go through all of the donuts in a back and forth pattern. And in the Apollo computer, if you look at a computer, like the first computer I ever had access to was in my dad's lab. It was an HP 2100 mini computer, and it had the core plane memory. They were about like that big, and you could hold them up to the light, and they were all. But what they did in the Apollo computers is the Japanese ladies folded all this stuff up and wired them in, and some of them actually had patterns wired into them. There were little donuts that were either there or missing to program a 0 or a 1 into the program. And they would form this thing, and they would test it, and then they would fold it up, and they would have a folding diagram of exactly how they would fold it up to fit in this little box that would then be plugged in, and they would pot it in epoxy. And so now they've got this thing that was built like this in the 1960s, and they're trying to get it to work again, and they find out it's got a broken wire in the middle of this thing, so you can't do anything with that. But then they've got they've got the lot 1 and the lot 2, and there's a person named Fran Blanche who has a YouTube channel who has been doing a lot of reconstruction on Apollo stuff. She's got a lot of tech stuff. she's also a male to female trans, which is another interesting aspect. But she's done a lot of stuff with NASA and some of the classic stuff, and she's vlogged it. But that was one of the things was figuring out exactly how, like, the display unit, the disky, worked. So everybody and their brother and their dog has done a disky. You just put in a bunch of LEDs and everything, but they didn't have LEDs in 1968. Mm-hmm. So the disky units that actually flew are electroluminescent. I don't know if you've ever seen these night lights that are just like this greenish flat thing that glow when you plug it in. Well, that's electroluminescent. They take about 100 volts to glow with that greenish glow. Mm-hmm. And that's how the disky display that actually flew in Apollo worked. And the problem is they didn't have transistors in 1968 that could switch 100 volts. So they were driven by relays. And they had this module that was like, the size of maybe a softball, that was just packed with relays. And that was the driver for the electroluminescent segments of the disky display. And one of the things Fran wanted to do was to actually build a faithful replica that worked the same way as the actual flight hardware. And to do this, she actually went to NASA, and they let her take apart some of the stuff that's in storage to do archival work on it and everything. And it's fascinating the lengths that they had to go through to do stuff that we completely take for granted today. The lengths that they went to, it's like they sucked up the entire world's supply of integrated circuits for 5 years. When this was the hot new product in the late 60s and early 70s, and ordinary industry couldn't get them. I remember when all of a sudden, like in 1973, you could go to Radio Shack and buy an integrated circuit. And before it was stuff that you just read it. And the reason was that NASA had been buying all of them.
There was a summer in the 60s where like you couldn't get bug spray or something. And it was because that was it was one of the compounds used to make the flight or make the fuel for the U-2 spy plane. Maybe it was the 50s. There was a summer where you couldn't get it because they're up in the number, they're up in the frequency of flights, and they needed all of it. It's just no bug spray. Sorry, sucks to suck. We got to spy on the commies. It's
got to keep the titanium lubricated or whatever it was.
Yeah. Taking all the titanium from the Soviet Union. Yeah, but it sometimes makes me think like. Do you think that there's just a prosaic explanation for why like the pyramids are so complex? Is it just like an Apple II computer, or it's just no one knows?
Well, they know some things about it. It's like they know there was a point in time where the Egyptians learned to build steeper pyramids, and there's actually a pyramid that starts with one slope and finishes with a shallower slope because it was about to collapse. And then there's a guy whose name that they know because the Egyptians made him a god who figured out how to build what they call the modern pyramids. And so it's like there are hieroglyphs that show this guy, and that tell the story about how he taught us how to make real pyramids that are good. So it's like they know that the Egyptians actually had a technology. But the funny thing there is the relationship that the ancients had to technology is so different than ours, because they had, in some senses, they had very advanced things. It's like you had the Greeks had rudimentary steam engines and other things that might have pointed the way toward more advanced technology, and they considered them curiosities. They weren't worth, they used them to open a temple door or something. Yeah. But as far as using it to actually do meaningful work in an industrial type of way simply didn't occur to them. That's not what this stuff is for. And that's strikingly how things went. One of the reasons we don't have any idea how a lot of the great Roman architectural and engineering works were done is that the Romans considered writing to be sacred, because let's face it, if you write something down, you're immortal. They got that from the Egyptians.
Yeah.
And so these assholes that are building us an aqueduct, they don't need that. It's like they hand their knowledge down from in an oral tradition, and that was fine until their empire fell and all that knowledge was lost. Yeah. And so now we look at these things and go, how the hell did they know how many pipes to put in this siphon? And it's like we can guess at it, but there was once a whole robust infrastructure there of how to build domes and aqueducts and all this stuff, and it wasn't considered worthy of being memorialized in a robust way. And of course, today we have a fetish for writing everything down.
Yeah.
But that really didn't exist until the Renaissance. That whole tradition of publication and the scientific method and all didn't exist before the 17th century for the most part. And so you had a lot of innovative stuff going on. Michael Crichton wrote an essay about how he wrote his time travel story, which is on the tip of my tongue. But he pointed out, he had his people going back to the 14th century because it was a very interesting time. A lot of interesting things were happening. People were coming up with new designs to power mills, and they were coming up with new war machines. And one of the things that I happened to mention in the curators is that the aliens are doing a study of human technology because it's so different from everyone else's. And I had one of the aliens mention that a lot of your people seem to think that it was war machines that drove your technology, but it was really the fact that you need cloth. Because one of the things I have in the story is that aliens none of the aliens wear clothes. That's a human fetish. And so because humans needed so much cloth, we developed these intricate looms and these machines for creating massive amounts of high quality cloth, and no one else in the galaxy has this stuff. That really, if you look at it, we were making cloth by advanced industrial techniques when we were still making guns by hand as handicrafts. The interchangeable parts were they didn't come along till the American method of manufacture, and that was in the late 1700s. So you had, but meanwhile you got people doing punch card looms to make patterns. Yeah. So that was a whole thing, and but again, what's sex? It's you think about, we're gonna storm this castle and we're gonna defend this thing and we're gonna be killing people and it's no, the real high tech is over at the mill where they're making some really fine pitched 300 count sheets.
They're making some great robes over there. It's like that quote, war is the engine of progress. But it's actually, no, it was wardrobe is the engine of progress. You left out drobe. It's a simple mistake. But, But I always think of that as, these weird things that are, it's was it Marshall McLuhan? The humans are the sex organs of the machine world. It's a weird thing. It does kind of seem like we're bringing in, almost like prime intellect. You don't just create prime intellect. There's 100 years leading up to it of computers, silicon, electricity, batteries. It seems or another way of looking at it is the caterpillar doesn't know what it's doing when it's forming the cocoon. It's right now we are quite literally wrapping the world in fiber optics and copper and.
Well, it's like Carolyn tells Lawrence at the beginning of Chapter 8, look around. You're not going to be building any self-aware computers here.
It's you. All
those giants whose shoulders you were standing on, went poof. So it's let's go camping.
You can only do so much. But when you look at it that way, it's almost kind of weird at like how unintelligent we are. You realize you're not necessarily more intelligent than Bob from 1400, but there's a school structure, there's pen and paper, there's like TV, there's audiobooks, but like you personally, like you're the same Homo sapien. You're not some elite. Yeah. No, you got more fertile ground.
There's one of the points that I made in one of the side essays. When I published it, I had 4 side essays about the background of the story. And I pointed out that primitive technology doesn't have an end game. It's an endless procession of things that you make and wear out and use up. So you make a bowl, but you're making it out of leather or out of grass or whatever. It's not going to last forever, and you don't expect it to. If you make an atlatl, or if you make a bow and arrow, or you make arrows, you make any of these tools, you use them up, you've got to be able to make more. And they also require skill. So you spend your time to learn how to use them, how to hunt successfully, but then you get old and you can't do it anymore. So what do you spend your senescent years doing? Telling Junior how to do it.
Yeah.
And so you don't reach an end game where you've made this thing and everyone can sit back and smoke a cigar and go, okay, that's done. Because either you need a certain skill to do it, or you're going to use it up, or you're going to wear it out, and you're going to need it again. And so primitive life is a continuous process. It can go on like that in very similar pattern for hundreds of thousands of years, changing very little, because it's, an innovation might be something that happens once in 10,000 years. Someone figures out how to build a fire bow, and then everything changes.
Yeah.
But we're used to a world that when you're 50 years old doesn't look anything like the world you lived in when you were 20 years old.
Yeah.
So I'll show you one of my secret things.
Let's see. What is that? Okay, looks like like a model city? No, I can't see. Is it? What is it?
Recognize these?
Hold it up more. Farther up. No, I don't. What is it?
These are vacuum tubes.
Oh, Jesus Christ. My God.
I own about 400 of them. I have a collection. And the thing about vacuum tubes is you can look at them. They're products of human craft. I can tell this is a dual triode power tube. And I can tell that by looking into the glass and seeing the form of the interior constructions. They're at human scale. Let's see. Oh, that is a magic eye tube.
Okay.
It would be mounted just like I'm holding it here out in the front of a radio set, and it would glow. And there would be a little sliver of light that would get wider or narrower depending on how your tuning of your station is going. And all of these things, there used to be, when I first was learning electronics, there were transistors, but they were very rare and esoteric and not very good, really. They couldn't switch high voltages. They couldn't handle large currents. They couldn't handle high-speed signals. So these glass things were in everything. If you owned a television set in the late 60s, it would, you know that sign on the back of your TV set that says no user serviceable parts inside? Mm-hmm. The reason that's there is there used to be user serviceable parts inside your TV set. If it went out, you would open it up and there would be about a dozen of these things in a typical television set. And you would take them, you would remember where they were plugged in, and you would haul them all down to the drugstore where they would have a tube tester. Mm-hmm. And you would look at the number and program it into the thing and plug it into the tube tester, and it would tell you whether the tube was within spec or not. And if you found a bad one, you would go to the counter, and a typical drugstore would have a collection of new tubes behind the counter for people who are doing this. And if it was really unusual, you might have to order it. But for the most part, there was probably about 150 models of tube that were most consumer electronics were based on at any given time. That changed a little over the years. In the late going, you had these guys. This is called a miniature tube, and you can see it's got a glass base with the metal pins just sticking straight out of the glass, and it's very small. In fact, this is a triple triode. Okay. It actually contains 3 amplifying elements in this small glass envelope, as opposed to, I don't have any of the real awkward large ones here. Okay. This is a beam pentode. This was the tube that would be in your television set to make the beam go back and forth horizontally, which took a lot of current at 15 kilohertz. And a lot of people built ham radio transmitters with these as the final output tube. So I don't have any of the more interesting ones. I have a couple of transmitting tubes, but they're in the living room. But yeah, that's my little vice there. Some people collect.
It's hypnotizing watching you talk about it because it's all black magic to me. So it's like looking at magic. This
first one that I showed you is typical of an older tube. This is an octal base, and as you can see, the wires coming out of the glass envelope. Oh, let me get this right here.
There you go.
They go into these formed pins, and they're soldered. So this is an older style that would have been more typical in the late 40s, early 50s. The glass-based tubes were more late 50s, 60s and onward. And the really old ones, before they had these octal tubes, I don't have any of the other ones. The original tubes had 4-pin bases, and then they had some 6-pin bases. As one of the things that they learned over the years was to put more elements in the tube. The original vacuum tube had 2 elements, and the only thing it would do is act as a detector, because what Thomas Edison actually figured out, it was the Edison effect, was that it would conduct current in one direction but not the other. So if you hooked up the negative lead to the filament of a light bulb and the positive lead to a plate that was suspended in the tube with it, it would conduct current. But if you switch the leads, if you put the negative lead on the plate and the positive on the filament, no current would flow. And Edison, in one of the more un-Edison things of his life, decided this was completely useless, and he patented it and then didn't use it for anything. And it was, I want to say, I don't think it was it wasn't Marconi, might have been Armstrong, who figured out that it would make a much better radio detector than the crystals that they were using, which were all finicky and all. But like when the Titanic sank, it had glass tube detectors. But in the early days, in the late teens, early 20s, they had what they called bright emitters. It was literally like a light bulb. It burned huge amounts of current and lit up the Radio Shack, because in order to get enough current to flow, you had to get that tungsten filament really hot. And in the early 20s, they learned to make what they call dull emitters. They coated the filament with thorium, and that caused it to make plenty of electrons at lower temperatures, so they didn't have to burn as hot. And that was the beginning of home electronics. That was really when it became practical to have a radio in your house, which was an unheard of thing before 1922 or so. That whole history of the early thing, really, I find it fascinating, because you gotta realize, it's like there are people walking around today who remember this time. It's like they remember Dad taking a battery to the auto shop to charge it so that they could come home and listen to the radio. Because that was how it was powered.
My ex-girlfriend, her grandfather passed away in 2015 at 100 years old, and he remembers when they put in like power lines and electricity, and it's just
Yeah.
He was 30 when World War II ended. And it's just like, and he was lucid up until the end. So it was just crazy talking to him, because it wasn't like, kind of like, like you're, cognitively declined, or it's very like, his physical systems were going, but like you'd sit there and talk to him. It was just like talking to you or me. You had to speak up, right? You talked a little slower, but I mean, he was 100% there. I remember it was like he was like watching like the news, and he'd be like comparing them. It wasn't like, what I grew up, Reagan did. He'd talk about, he'd be like, this guy's nothing like Truman, and you'd be like, holy fuck, you actually just. And that wasn't just you were 30. It wasn't just like he was my age when he was like, God damn, the war's over. And then he was like alive, and it was like Snapchat was 2 years old. It was like, I remember hearing somewhere is like, this guy talking about his grandmom, and he was like, she was born in like post-Civil War, like Reconstruction South, and her son worked on the lunar lander. Mm-hmm. To me, that is like, hold on, post-Reconstruction, post-Civil War South, and you saw like one small step for man. That has got to be. I mean, what the fuck?
My best friend from high school, his father worked on the fuel pumps for the Saturn V for the main F1 engines. And he was so broken up when the program ended, he fell ill and he died shortly thereafter, and leaving my friend without a father. Damn. But what it is his team practically killed themselves trying to get the next contract after the Apollo program was canceled, and they were trying to get the project for the shuttle, which was the next thing coming, and they didn't get the bid.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I remember the moon landing myself.
Really?
I was about 5 years old. So
Jesus.
Yeah. So I remember when humans had never walked on the moon, and that's weird.
That is insane. My mom was 5'4". She remembers her mom crying because John Kennedy was killed. But she didn't know why. But she says she vividly just remembers her mom crying.
Yeah, my wife remembers the Kennedy assassination and the Cuban Missile Crisis. I missed both by about a year. I was not born yet.
Yeah, it's my earliest memory. Well, it's not of anything important. I just kind of remember like walking, like pulling like a train on a string. I remember. Let's see. I was in fifth grade. I remember 9/11. I remember 9/11 pretty well, because I loved skyscrapers growing up too. So like that was like a huge thing. That was crushing for me. Whereas everyone else was like, "What are the geopolitical implications?" I was like, "No, you fucking got rid of 110-story buildings, you assholes!" Like, I was like, God damn.
You'll appreciate that when I was growing up, The Towering Inferno was one of my favorite movies.
Oh, yeah?
I was obsessed by it.
Yeah. And, didn't they remake one with The Rock, Skyscraper?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I'm trying to think. That obviously remember Y2K. I remember like the Bush election. I remember it was like weird because it was like, I remember thinking it was paused. I was like, why is this paused? I didn't know what was going on, but I would remember.
Because of the Florida thing.
I thought you said the fluoride thing. I was like, no, I wasn't into conspiracies then. It was the fluoride thing. No, yeah, the hanging chads.
Florida man.
Yeah, Florida man. Yeah, it's.
Yeah. What else? Well, you wouldn't have been thinking in terms of something like Windows 95 because you would have been too young to be messing with computers.
No, I was 5. I have some memory. I remember our first computer. I remember playing solitaire on it. It was a Dell. I remember we got sent home from school because of Columbine, but that was 99. Yeah, I remember it was like, why did they shoot everyone? I just couldn't. I was like, I still can't comprehend it. But even then, I was like, I remember my 5th grade teacher tried to water down 9/11 for us because she didn't want us to freak out. Which, in hindsight, like I get, you got a bunch of 11-year-olds, but in 5th grade. But she was like, but I remember the way she just. I remember the other teacher told the students that like. planes crashed into the towers, but like she told them what happened, but she said it was over. The attack is over, because at that time it was, and so it was like okay.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember my teacher, Miss Woodall, just completely watered it, nerfed it down to the point where it was like, incoherent. She said 2 angry men got in a helicopter and crashed it into the Statue of Liberty and jumped out beforehand. And I remember thinking, what the fuck?
That gets about everything wrong.
But then I went home and I was like, what? Why are the World Trade Centers on fire? Because like I said, I was into skyscrapers. I was like, you didn't say anything about that. And like, yeah. I remember Timothy McVeigh being put to death, I think.
Do you remember Oklahoma City itself?
No, I'm not sure I did. What year was that? Was that 93?
Yeah, that was in the early. That may have been a little bit.
I think I might have been too young. My first memory is like 95. That's like my first clear memory of anything. It's like 95.
And of course, Bill Clinton was elected in 92, so that was probably.
Remember Monica Lewinsky? Yeah, I remember that. That was like a funny
that
thing.
was toward the end of his.
That was a funny thing. Yeah.
Term.
I remember the rise of Slim Shady. Yeah, that.
So
Columbine. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I used to go out and look for people who had thrown television sets away, and I would collect them from the side of the road and take them home, and I would sell. That's where I got a lot of these vacuum tubes from.
Yeah.
And a lot of people would do that and then use them to build amateur radio rigs or whatever. I can tell you the power transformers from those things would have like a 400-volt coil on them, and even ohming them out with a voltmeter, if you made the mistake of letting the voltmeter separate while your finger was still touching the wire on the transformer, when you released it, it would shock you, because that transformer had so much inductance, and so you learn to be careful about little things like that. My mom never did understand. She was always freaking out that I will electrocute myself or something, and Dad would be trying to mollify her about that. But I remember how things gradually changed. I had a television set when it was a fairly new thing for a teenager to have their own TV set. It was a 12-inch black and white, because color sets were like expensive.
Yeah, that was fun.
And it was a hybrid. It actually had transistors and vacuum tubes.
Oh, shit.
So it had transistors for the low power stuff, but it had vacuum tubes for the power drivers, for the CRT stuff and the audio output. And so you still had the screws on the back, and you could remove the back, and you'd have the tubes that you would take to K&B and test them. Or, I just revealed where I lived there.
No.
New Orleans lore. We used to have a pharmacy chain called Katz and Bestoff's, K&B. They had a purple logo, and everybody in New Orleans knew them. And in the 80s, they built the second span of the Crescent, what they call the Crescent City Connection, but to me, it's always going to be the Greater New Orleans Mississippi River Bridge. If you look at some period things like movies and stuff from the time, you'll see air shots of New Orleans where the second bridge is half completed.
Jesus.
And that like nails the time frame of the movie. But anyway, so this being a typical government project, right? They had federal funding. They built the bridge across the river, and they finished the bridge across the river before they realized, well, it's not very useful without approaches. Those are the state's problem. So for a few years, we had this bridge across the river that just ended on either side of the river, and there was nothing leading up to it. So you couldn't like actually get a vehicle up to it or anything. And when they laid out the approaches through downtown New Orleans, one of them went right through the middle of the Katz and Bestoff pharmacy chain's office building. And the K&B management were just like, can't you find something else? And they were like, look, no, man, the engineers have decided this is the optimum route. And they actually sold out rather than deal with this. So they just sold the whole thing to CVS and retired in Jamaica or whatever.
Not a bad move.
that was one of those things that that was quintessentially New Orleans that ain't dare no more. There's a local band that has a little folk song called "Ain't Dare No More." Dare, D-E-R-E.
Yeah.
And it's just all of the stuff that used to exist in New Orleans that doesn't. It's, cats and feathers. It was ain't dare no more.
Ain't nobody got time for that. Yeah, it's. I remember going in 2013 to interview, December 2013, to interview at Tulane Medical School. And I remember walking by on like campus to like one of the hospital. They're like built a new hospital, but it was like the hospital that was like completely fucked by Katrina. And I remember in 2013, you could still see just there's like the literal high water mark on it.
Oh yeah,
I remember seeing that, and I was like, that's eerie. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and after the storm, it was really something else. In fact, if you ever look up Cam Riley's podcast interview, which I did in 2006, of course, the whole city was still a wreck at that point. And toward the end of the interview, he asked me about New Orleans, and I was just like, I was stunned. I was still, it's like I never thought I would live to see this happen to a major American city.
Yeah,
with the refugees gathering, we call them the neutral ground, the medians of the streets, but caravans of buses picking up homeless people from the ruined stadium and all this. I mean, it's like, you got to be freaking kidding me. It's like a third world country.
It was nuts.
And even today, the scars are still there. But I grew up in the suburbs, so it's funny because my parents came here from Mississippi, and so I didn't really have like the New Orleans background. That's why I don't like have a classic New Orleans accent and all that. So we would go like to the suburban Chalmette Mardi Gras, where we'd see the truck parade. We didn't go downtown to that stuff and all. But it's still New Orleans, and the suburb where I grew up had 7.5 feet of water. So, and it was there for 3 weeks. So as soon as it was safe and it was open again, I went back to see the house where I'd grown up, which was across the street from a Catholic church and down the street from a middle school and an elementary school. And I was there in this neighborhood that was completely dead. Every blade of grass was brown. Every tree and shrub was brown. It was completely silent. And I was standing in front of this house where I grew up, and there was a guy about 4 blocks away who was jacking up a car to tow it, and I could hear everything he was doing.
That's weird. That's eerie.
It was that quiet. And to this day, in some parts of the city, there are still houses that are still boarded up, that there are still vacant lots and fields of vacant lots. And part of it is I would have been in favor, frankly. That neighborhood where I grew up was a mistake. What happened there is if you drive out from the middle of New Orleans, if you're in the Central Business District or the French Quarter, this was where the city was sited because it's the high land. So it would flood, but not that often. And for the most part, the French Quarter is actually above sea level. Not very much, but it's on an old river levee, so it's the high ground. That's why they put the city there. And as the city grew outward, the land got lower and lower, and you can see the houses getting higher and higher as they get further from the middle of the city, because what they wanted was for that flood that they knew was going to come to not inundate the living areas of the house. So they built them a few feet above ground until you get to a point where they're actually building them above like an entire disposable ground floor. Mm-hmm. Which they would use for storage and expendable stuff. And you would have like a 6 or 8 foot staircase to climb to get into the house.
There are some around here in Maryland. There are some like that where it looks like the whole thing is almost just like on stilts.
Yeah. And then you reach a certain point all the way around the town, and they go back to just being a couple feet above street level. And that was 1910. That's when they built the pumping system.
Oh, Jesus.
And so at that point, they figured we have what was at the time considered one of the wonders of the world, the most aggressive drainage system ever built. And in a lot of senses, it still is. But at that point, people figured we don't have to build 8 feet in the air anymore because we have a drainage system. We can just build high enough so that the street flooding and when we have a powerful rainstorm won't get us. But we don't have to worry about the Gulf of Mexico getting in our front door anymore. And so that from there out for more miles, it's all these houses that are about as high off the ground as this desk. Just high enough so that if the street floods, you don't get it into the house. And then after World War II, a couple of developers came in and decided to build some slab-on-grade subdivisions, which really, if you want to go back and say, here's somebody that was too stupid to live and you should just go back and kill them when they were a baby. The people who decided to build slab-on-grade houses in New Orleans should be near the top of the list. And I grew up in one of those houses. So they built a few of those and nothing bad happened, because this was in the 50s. And so they built a few more further out and lower down and on and la-di-da. So anyway, the house that I grew up in, that house, it did flood when Hurricane Betsy came through. Mm-hmm. But it only had 3 feet of water, and the water didn't hang around because the drainage system did work. They were able to get the water out. And so it didn't linger, and they just patched up the sheetrock and replaced the furniture. And by the time my parents bought the house a couple of years later, you couldn't tell that it had been through anything like that. Mm-hmm. Well, karma's going to get you one day, eventually. And so Katrina came along, and the problem that Katrina caused was all these wonderful pumps are in the middle of town. Now, the reason they're in the middle of town is that it wasn't the middle of town when they were built. Mm-hmm. It was the edge of town. Mm-hmm. But they kept building the town around them, outward. So that meant the pumps had to pump the water into canals to take the water to Lake Pontchartrain. Well, it was those canals that breached in Katrina. Okay. So we have these wonderful pumps that could pump the water in circles, because you would pump it into the canal and it would go through the breach in the canal and come back, and you could pump it again if you wanted to, but until they could fix the canals, you couldn't pump the water out of the bowl. And so that was when they finally realized we need to spend some money and build some pumps that are actually at the new edge of town at the lake itself. And we've got a project that pumps into the river now and near where I work. But it was like they sat on their hands. Those pumps are so old that they don't use 60 cycle power. They use 25 cycle power, because when they were built in 1910, the electric grid hadn't been standardized yet. So to this day, they need special generating stations to generate the power that the New Orleans drainage system needs for those pumps to operate. And of course, when one of those generators goes out, so does the pump that they're feeding, and that's been a problem a few times.
Jesus.
So it's this combination of just amazing tech that was so far ahead of its time. It's amazing, and then just stupid bonehead shit.
Yeah.
Anybody who thought about it for more than 5 minutes should be able to realize is a really bad idea. Yeah. So I was in favor of just bulldozing everything east of the Industrial Canal and letting the swamp take it back. But of course, they didn't have the political will to do that, because it would have been, there were too many property owners that wanted to reclaim their property. And it was like, why? You got a neighborhood that's going to have 40% residency and 30% vacant lots and 30% boarded up houses. You wants to live there?
Old people that don't give a shit, and they're like, "This is my home. Fuck off."
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I actually ran into the people who were living in my house about 6 months later. I was going to show one of my coworkers where I grew up, and we pulled up, and there was a FEMA trailer in front of it. And we're like, in fact, there were 2 FEMA trailers, and was like, what the hell? There are people living in this house. And so I told Lonnie to stop the truck. I want to find out what's going on here, because there was very little else going on. There was, but that house, that particular house where I grew up, had somebody living in FEMA trailers in front of it, and it was a young couple that they bought the house. They were like a couple owners past my parents after they sold it, and they were like, yeah, we wanted to move to some place like Laplace, which was a little higher, better protected, but they just didn't have the money. The land like that had gotten too dear in value, and they figured their best shot was to take the money from the government and fix the old place back up and hope for the best. Which actually turned out to be a good bet because it hasn't flooded again in 15 years. So I guess they got their money out of that.
Yeah, that's
not a bet I would have made, but
that's why you got to go live in the International Space Station.
Yeah. I actually live in Mandeville, which if you look at a map of New Orleans, of southern Louisiana, you'll see Lake Pontchartrain and the Mississippi River. And New Orleans is actually sandwiched between those two, the river and the lake. But if you're looking at a road map, you'll see a little line drawn right across the middle of Lake Pontchartrain at its widest point. Because this is Louisiana, and that's how we roll. That's the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway. Would have been 10 miles shorter if they built it 5 miles to the left or right, but we built it right across the widest part of the lake, 24 miles long, and I commute across it to get to work. From the middle of the bridge, you can't see land.
That's like the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, I think, in Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I don't know how long it is, but I mean, there's a point where you're driving across and you feel like you're just driving into the ocean. You just look behind you. I mean, it's like 20 minutes to get across the whole thing. 20 minutes doing like 70. You're just like looking around, just like.
Yeah, the causeway is 24 miles. It's classed as the longest bridge across open water in the world.
Jesus.
Because there are longer bridges that are not interrupted, but all of them come closer to land than their endpoints at some point. Whereas at the causeway, when you're in the middle of the causeway, you are 12 miles from land. There is no point of land closer to you than the endpoints of the bridge.
Fuck that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been driving across it since 1992.
Jesus, that sounds terrifying. You
get used to it. Well, the nice thing about it, though, the terrifying thing about it, besides being long, is it doesn't have a shoulder. It's 2 parallel bridges, a northbound and a southbound. Each has 2 lanes.
Yeah, same with the Chesapeake.
Yeah, and there's no shoulder. But what's nice about it is there's also no on or off ramps. So the people who commute get the drill. If you mess up the commuters, the causeway cops find your ass and correct you. Most of the people who drive across it every day aren't maniacs. They get in line. They just, you put the car on autopilot, have a beer, whatever. Take the take the car off of cruise control when you get to the end of the bridge. But you don't have all these people. I used to have a much shorter commute on Interstate 10, and it was like vroom, 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 constantly people weaving in and out.
Yeah.
People going fast and people going slow, and it's like, oh my God, you're slamming the brakes, and there's a traffic jam, and there's an accident, and all this and that. Every once in a while, something bad happens, and the bridge clogs up, and you don't get to work till 10 o'clock. But for the most part, 99% of the time, it's just uneventful.
Yeah, that's how the Chesapeake Bay is. There's the speed limit, but the speed limit is also the minimum speed limit. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no shoulder, there's no passing. It's like it's like you are now on the bridge. You are now going this speed until you get off. Do not stop.
Yeah, and if you have a flat tire, you have to drive on it until you get to the next crossover where you can pull out of the traffic lane.
If
you stop. Yeah. When the causeway cop comes behind you, they will tell you to put the car in gear and drive on your flat tire until you get to the crossover.
Yeah, it is. That is true. Roger, let's wrap this bitch up. I need to go make some dinner. My tummy's grumbling. But
Okay.
I'll email you, dude. I'm definitely down for another one. I like chatting with you, man. I like just going in.
Sure.
Fuck yeah, man. I love.
Hey.
There's no rules to this podcast. What?
I'll do a little show. Actually, I have, on the vacuum tube thing, I have a radio that I built from a set of plans that were published in Boy's Life in 1929 using a Model 30 vacuum tube. The one that I have was manufactured in 1927. And I built this thing about 14 years ago, according to these plans, using a 90-year-old vacuum tube, and it works.
Jesus Christ. Well, that's what we're doing next episode. We're doing show and tell. It's a plan. Roger Williams, author of The Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect. And he has also watched the movie Contact. So...
Yeah, one of the three other people.
Fuck you. I also saw the opening credits. That was a coup d'etat. You won that one. I will give you the chips. You won today.
Yeah. But they were having a special that year because it was also the final scene of Men in Black.
Oh yeah. You're right.
Those came out within like 6 months of one another, and it was like, oh yeah, they're having a special this year on deep space zooms.
I was about to say, yeah, the stock footage, it has to go. Everything must go. Stock footage gotta go. Yeah, you can always tell with certain things. It's like, oh yeah, you could tell that was a hot thing at the time, right? Yeah.
It's like computer animation.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the stock sounds too. Yeah, you can always tell. That's not, me and my friends were joking. I think we were watching like Die Hard or whatever. And we were laughing. We're like, you can always tell who America's enemy is at the time of the making of a movie because you just got to look at the nationality and skin color of the enemy. Right now, now it's moving more into Chinese. It was Arabs for a while. If you go back into the 80s, it's all fucking Far East guys like, hello. Like, you can always tell who America's enemy is. Just like paint them as that. Like, that's weird. The bad guy is blonde hair, blue-eyed. Well, yeah, we were at war with them. And it's like, oh, damn, okay. But nowadays, it's like, how come they're all Arabs? I don't know. Now they're all Chinese. Eventually, the power structure is going to slip up, and it's going to be like, how come all the bad guys are Jamaican this year? And it's going to be like, they flipped up the script. Like, oh, no, the false flag hasn't happened yet. Oh, no, you guys got the script early. Damn it, who released it? Roger Williams. I'll email you. Let me start processing this, and I'll email you tonight, and let's set up the next one.
Okay.
All right, buddy. Peace. Thank you for doing it, my man. Stay safe. Peace.
Okay.